That brings me to you, Jose Antonio. I mean, there's been plenty of private equity deals in Spain, or in the Iberian, Spain and Portugal. What do you think? Do you think that it was a real kind of fad? There was just a big series of them. Do you think that again is going to continue, or have we seen that? Have they moved on to other things in terms of the kind of?
Yeah, well, it's funny because sometimes you see this happening as a bit of a fashion, and all of a sudden, you see a relevant sort of local private equity house stepping into a specific industry, and all of a sudden you have a flock of, flocking, the rest of them flocking into that specific industry. We've seen this in Spain. We had seen, private equity guys just forgetting about this industry for many years, and all of a sudden we had a number of them stepping in, sort of back again. It's not only local private equity houses like maybe Alantra buying Union Martin or GED buying the Octopus process of the Cefa, but it's also large international ones such as Platinum buying Iberconsa, which is the second largest frozen seafood player in Spain, just behind Pescanova. We've even seen Abanca, which is a bank, buying out other financial investors out of Pescanova. So, all of a sudden we've seen the renewed interest in the industry. But I tend to agree with what Matthias was saying, which is the fact that this is a complex industry with a high degree of volatility when it comes to prices, and not necessarily a sector which is easy to finance from a lender's perspective. At the end of the day, you have banks saying, well, hold on, just let me understand how the dynamics of pricing of the raw material plays out here. How do I, cover my position as a lender in this specific investment? So, having said that, we've seen that interest from private equity happening in the recent past. The question is, will we see this happening in the short to medium term? We've definitely seen private equity houses stepping into primary sector, especially in the agribusiness side of things. Just thinking that this is an industry that should be resilient. People need to eat, as some of the panelists mentioned a couple of minutes ago. But volatility around raw material pricing is, I'd say, the number one element that, to a certain extent, deters a bit of that interest from the private equity industry.
You mentioned there the Platinum deal for Iberconsa and then Abanca and Pescanova. I mean, what do you see as likely exits for those investments? Because if Portobello wasn't able to sell Iberconsa to another trade, will Platinum be able to? And kind of the same with Abanca and Pescanova, really. I mean, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, well, the reality is that when it comes to specific sectors or specific species, such as hake or shrimp, which are probably the ones where Pescanova and Iberconsa are strong in, scale is everything to attract interest from the large sort of Asian players, such as the Marujas, Nisuis, and so on. I mean, and when I mean scale, that's north of 100 million euro of EBITDA. When you reach that point, you basically have 2 or 3 alternatives playing out in the same way, which you can either IPO a business. In countries such as Spain, you need certain scale to float a business into the public market, and that is typically more than 100 million EBITDA business. And similarly, happens with attracting trade. And I think that one of the things that have been an issue when selling businesses in specific species, I'm not talking about other species where, for example, tuna or even octopus, scale is not that relevant. It is relevant, but not that relevant. When it comes to sort of, global species, such as mentioned, hake or shrimp, scale is everything. So if you want to have different alternatives as exit options, and that is selling to trade, IPOing a business, or even a secondary or tertiary buyout to a private equity house, you need scale. And I think one of the things that Portobello struggled with is building a business above 100 million euro EBITDA to really attract players from regions such as Asia. I mean, it was not a coincidence that Nomura had the sell-side mandate for Iberconsa. It was very clear they were going to attract interest from Asian buyers, but that didn't happen, as you mentioned. I think scale is everything.
Well, there was interest, wasn't there? But it didn't seem to go beyond that. It was interest. Yeah. Great. And actually, just before we kind of look at getting some questions from the audience, because there's quite a lot have come in, Alan, I wanted to get a bit of a sense from you about private equity in Asia. I mean, we've seen quite a few, well, I say quite a few, at least some notable deals. The biggest that I can think of being Permira buying into Growbest in the kind of feed sector in Asia. Do you why have we not seen more of those deals with private equities buying into Asia? And is there an opportunity there with the pandemic, or is it going to really deter them?
Well, I echo with Jose's view that people need to eat, and private equity loves sticky customers, and no matter with or without a pandemic, people are going to eat seafood, and that is very attractive to financial investors who are looking for that kind of cash flow stability. Now, getting to cash flow stability, that in Asia, ultimately is a seafood exporting kind of economy, and the volatility of farm gate prices or export prices of seafood, coupled with a number of governance issues, have made seafood investment quite hard for PEs, and that is also that in Asia in particular, that when you go for an IPO, that biological asset risk is also something that, for example, the Hong Kong Stock Exchange does not really like. So if you're trying to IPO something with a lot of biological assets, it can be challenging in this part of the world. Now, having said that, strategic and PEs that both continue to express interest in a number of ongoing seafood deals. If the difference between these two is that the strategics are looking in areas and business with lower geopolitical risk, whereas the private equities are looking for like a middle class consumer story. I think I can't say for everyone, but I would think that many management teams I've talked to says that the pandemic is a transient matter. It will not change the long-term trend in Asia. Indeed, the pandemic has been a massive boost for seafood e-commerce in China, for example. So I would foresee that a lot of investments are still coming into this part of the world. But with I think, and indeed for outbound as well. But the difference here is that I think Western investors or PE investors are having an increased appetite in Southeast Asia. Investors out of China, whether they're strategics or financials, they are seeking to deploy capital offshore. And in the meantime, everyone is looking at agri-tech investments. So, and that includes the seafood sector as well.
Yeah, if I may there, Tom, I'd like to chime in. The issue that you have with Asian buyers, in many cases, it has to do with scale, but even more important, their lack of management capability. I mean, they even though they are good traders and they purchase, products from around the world, they do not have the management capability, expertise, cross-border to go and take over, a major fishing operation overseas. The only great example that we have are in North America and Europe. But I think that, for example, in the case of other Australis, even in Chile, I think they're still struggling there. And we haven't seen really, a major player taking over a fishing operation in Latin America recently. Quite the opposite. I mean, if you remember a few years ago, many of the Japanese houses actually exited. So, I think that on that note, also, I would say, the strategy followed for the Iberconsa sale of trying to target, the Asian houses, probably was a mistake from the beginning. That's why it ended up there. I mean, also, the Asian market does not demand hake. So, I leave a question mark there.